So I think lots of people missed last week, but it can be found on YouTube, and I'll make sure that the link is shared with it so you can catch up if you did. I just looked at going through loops last time around, so we did just a little bit on for loops and while loops, and just some examples of the kinds of things that I pick out and identify with the students to make sure they understand how that works and how we can use them effectively in lots of different ways. Um, so today, just going to move on and look at the bits where the exam board is looking for string manipulation. So being able to take some strings, do something with them, um, and then obviously maybe display or store them later on. And obviously this is quite a big bit. There's normally a question based around some form of string manipulation in the exam because it is one of the kind of basics that you should be able to do. Um, so it's obviously quite an important uh, tool to be able to use. Um, so, um, So obviously these are just my hints and tips as we've covered before in terms of writing algorithms when it comes to the exams. Um, I just, let's say, tend to get the students to write in their language, but just change the function names into capitals just to make it really clear and make it stand out. And it just helps to break it up and have that little bit of extra structure, like especially kind of things like Python. You can't necessarily tell if they're just writing it by hand. So it just helps to break it up and make it a little clearer for whoever's marking the exam as they go through. Um, as we've just been talking, if you're hearing, I see Prim is something that I use for it, and it does really help all the students since I've been using it. The low ability students make huge progress. The high ability students are able to whiz off and create some really good programs if you structure extra parts in there and allow them to do that. And so it is a really good structure, but it does force them all to really understand what's going on because they have to go through and answer some questions on it and show that they understand. And so that it does slow the high ability down a little bit and make them think about what they're writing as well. So they're not just kind of coding just because they can code. They're thinking about what's going on below and how they can use all the different tools in different ways. I won't go through this in detail, but we'll look at it how we go as we go through. Um, See, this is the kind of structure of how I set it up, and there is a document that I've put on CAS, and I can share the link if you think that you might be needing it if you can't find it. But if you search for Prim, it should be one of the top ones that come up because it's proved fairly popular. There's one for GCSE and there's one for Year 8 that we use, and we just use this kind of structure so they can go through. When it comes to the low ability, we tend to scaffold it a little bit. So I move the make section to the end. So they might have 4 prim tasks, for example, but they'll only do the first 4 sections, so PRI and first M initially, and they'll do that 4 times, and then they'll finish off by kind of putting that all together and having a go at some make tasks. And I'll give them some pointers in here on how they can solve the make tasks in there. And again, with the really low ability, I'll make sure that the modify tasks have some pointers about what they need to change in order for it to work, just so they can start to get used to it. And obviously the aim is to try and get them onto doing it without the pointers, but obviously those pointers can be vital for some of the really low ability students. But it's the questioning that's the important part. So we'll get on to having a look through some. Please feel free to stop and ask. So initially what I would do as I was teaching would be to introduce some of the tools and how they use. So this will look at things like concatenation. This will look at kind of upper and lower functions, length functions, and substrings and getting part of a string out of it. Well, those are kind of the main ones that OCR will be looking for. So the first one is kind of an example of concatenation. So obviously it gives a chance to have a read through the code and get them to think about it. So I'll just give you a moment or two just to think about what you think this code might do. And then once you've had a think about it, then you can have a go at starting to code it and see if what you thought was right initially. And obviously that's then you doing the run part. There are ways that some people will give them the code, so they'll give them the program file to have a look at it. But I prefer to get people into typing the code and see the typing mistakes and finding those errors that they put in, and just getting used to typing the language, I think, is a lot more useful.
I have a question.
That's fine.
So in line 1 and 2,
yep,
you have taken the number and changed it to an integer.
Yep.
And then in line 4, it
Yep.
concatenates it and it says the answer is, and then it says plus string num1 and num2. Does that mean that it doesn't actually add it up? It just puts the two numbers that you've entered together. And then in the second line, line 5, where there is no string, it actually does the calculation?
Not quite, no. Because the num1 plus num2 is in the brackets for string, it will evaluate that first. So it will do the calculation. So it'll do whatever num1 was. So let's say it's 4 and 5. So it'll do 4 plus 5 and turn it into 9. But the string function is needed because we're using concatenation. You can't join a number and text together. You'll get an error message. So what you have to do is any numbers need to be turned into a string before they can be added together, or joined together, I should say. The reason you don't need the string function on the second line is because we're not doing concatenation. We're treating it as two different arguments that are then just put next to each other.
Got it.
So, and that's what the investigate bit looks at. So when we're going through, so those are the things that I'm looking for them to be picking out. So obviously, what does the plus mean when we're doing it with two strings? Obviously, that's highlighting that we can use plus for different things. And obviously getting them used to the idea that it means one thing if it's strings and one thing if it's numbers. And obviously the next question obviously ties around the question that you were just asking. So I get them to remove the string function so they can see that they can't join them together. And in the previous lesson, so that there was one of the I think it's the first or the second lesson that I do with the students. I get them to try and add a string and a number together, and it creates this error message. And this is just kind of reinforcing that that they go through. And obviously, then hopefully they're working out that the str function is a string function. And then looking at the difference between the plus and the comma in there. So looking at them, just thinking that actually I can use both, but in some cases it's not really worth using both. In most cases, and especially the exams, it's the line 4 that is the one that is important, and that's the one that they're going to see, because not all languages are like Python in terms of being able to have two different arguments within the print statement.
So does that mean that because, oh my goodness, let's see if I explain this. It says in line 4, where you have plus the string num1 plus num2. So num1 plus num2 is 9.
Yep.
But does that mean because the string is on the outside of that bracket, that whatever the output is of 9
Yeah.
is no longer an int, it's a
Yes.
string, and that you can no longer calculate it.
Yes. So whatever the result of that calculation is, so if it's 9, it'd be that string, and then let's say you were storing that in a variable to use later on, you'd no longer be able to do regular maths with the number that is stored in that variable, because it would now be a string, which obviously means that we can't go through. So what I'll do, just to show this, hopefully. Sorry, got so many tabs open. So if I go through, I don't know, I think I might have made my text a little bit small, so I'll just make it a little bit bigger, hopefully. So if I was to have my 3 plus 4, or 3 plus 5, so initially, I could then do something along the lines of something like along the lines of that, but I could then have something that then turns that into a string, and then if I then do exactly the same thing, when I run this, hopefully, what I'll see is, I've got my 3 plus 5, which is 8 initially. So if I times 8 by 6, I get 48. But if I times it after I've converted it into a string, I just get 6 8s. Does that make sense? And does that kind of help to show how it works?
Yes, and now I have a whole nother set of questions.
Yeah, go for it.
I really hope I'm not bugging everyone else who's on mute. Sorry. So normally you would have that numbers equals 3 plus 5. You would have declared it as an integer, or if you hadn't, it would always say it would just be a string. But here you've not declared it at all.
In Python, you don't have to say that it's going to be an integer or not. The only time you have to do that is if you're using the input function. So if I was to have
no, I get that now, the input function. So yeah, okay.
So it's the input function that is where you have to change it so that it's a string or not a string. With other languages, yes, you would have to declare it as being a number or as a string, but Python is a little bit kinder in that way. So these are just a couple of tasks. Feel free to have a go at doing those, and if you've got any questions, then let me know. I'll happily kind of answer anything as you go through, if there's anything you don't know how to do or you just want some pointers. But these would be the modify and obviously the make tasks. And once the students start to get used to kind of going through these, you'll find that some can just whiz through and you don't have to keep telling them what to do. And then others you might just carry on and just get them to do one step at a time, a little bit like I'm doing now for a little bit longer. how's everyone getting on with that? Anyone got any questions or anything?
I'm all right.
Yeah, happy with that. Everyone else all right? And everyone else is quite quiet today. Early morning, I think. Um, so yeah, so obviously they're hopefully fairly straightforward, and just kind of introducing that idea of concatenation. And I think that the key bit is just to make sure that you use that term as much as possible, because it's obviously a new term, and the students won't necessarily be used to it, and obviously making sure they clearly understand. So I spend ages just going over and just making sure that I use it as much as I can within the lesson, as possible, so they kind of really get used to hearing it and using it, and get them to use it as much as they can as well. So the next one is a little bit similar, obviously, in terms of doing some string manipulation, and this one is using the lower function. And again, obviously, give them students some time, and I'll just give you a moment, just as I'm talking, to think about what this one might do, and how it might work, and why we might do it in this way as well. And then obviously have a chance to try and run it and see whether you're right or not. What do we think this one does do?
Since no one else is talking, should I just have a guess?
Go for it.
I have no idea.
No.
Is it that the dot lower will take, doesn't matter what the username is, it will change it into lowercase?
Yeah. So we've got this username that we're looking for, so student, which is all in lowercase, and we've got this user guess that the user can go through and type in anything. So even if they type it in capital letters, it's going to convert it into lowercase, which would then mean that there will be a match. And so it's kind of this first bit on the line to creating robust programs, that it doesn't matter what input is put in, we try and deal with it as best as we can, so that the program doesn't crash. And it's something that we could talk about, but I tend to kind of leave the talking about the robust bus programming until later on, and once I've got kind of used to the concepts initially, I can then kind of come back to it and refer to it later on.
So at this point where you've got while username is not equal to user guess, user guess is equal to it, just so this now is a loop, and the loop will just keep going, and there's no counting, there's no you get to 3, that's it, you're stupid, don't crashing, whatever. And because there's no end to this while, that means that the program will just keep going and going and going until they get it right.
So it could be an infinite loop. It could go on forever, if they keep getting it wrong. If they've just leant on the keyboard, and it will just keep going through until they finally get it right. So so there's no counter on there at all. So it's what we just call a conditional loop.
So then if they do put in student, the program will just stop because it doesn't do anything else.
So there's nothing else afterwards, and so I think those from memory are the kind of the next part. So obviously you've just described how it works. Obviously you've explained what the exclamation mark equals means, and obviously then I just get them to try it in different ways so they can see how it's working, and see whether it matters at all, whether the capital letters are in different places or not. And just get them kind of used to how this function works. And then obviously the modify, I get them to do it in a slightly different way, using the uppercase instead. And so see if they can work out what they need to change. And then the make part is a modification of a task I had them do when they were doing their if statements. And now I just want them to do it so that it doesn't matter how they type in triangle and square, as long as they do type in that word, whether it's uppercase or lowercase, they should have the program working.
If you're waiting for me to do that program, I'm not going to.
No, that's fine.
And I don't know what anyone else is doing, so
just giving people a little bit, just have a look through. Just, I mean, even just thinking about it and seeing how it's working. If there's any questions, just kind of, I know it's mainly you asking, well, only you at the moment asking questions, so just giving you a chance to have a think and answer or ask anything if there is anything.
So is the to do it in uppercase, is it just instead of just lower, you just write upper?
Yeah. And you would also need to change the username so that that was uppercase as well. So the student would need to be written in uppercase.
Right.
Otherwise, obviously, it'd be trying to match it to a lowercase version of student, but you're converting into upper. So you'd have those two changes that they need to make.
Is there a function which would take anything?
What do you mean by taking?
That means that it doesn't matter whether you typed in upper or lowercase, that it would match it as long as the letters were right and in the right order.
So that's kind of the way that the reason you'd use these. So you would decide how you wanted the username to be written, so whether it's upper or lowercase, and then you just make sure that you turn the user's input into upper or lowercase to match it, and that's kind of how you'd go about making sure that it would always work. So this one would always work, so if they typed it all in uppercase or even if they typed it all in lowercase, it would still work.
And then I guess the next steps, like if you were going to use an array, you would then have a list of usernames and then it would check.
Yeah, so you could then start to go into obviously having more than one user, and so it could check each of them. So is it in this array? And again, you can use the same dot lower and to make sure that you're not kind of limiting to making sure they type it in exactly the right case. So, but I don't introduce kind of looking for arrays for a little while longer. Then the next one that I look at is the length function, and obviously again they have this kind of prediction of what they think might happen, and providing they've been listening and they can read through the code, they're generally quite good at predicting what they think might happen with this program. I don't know if there's any parts of that that are a little bit unsure or unclear at the moment. But again, obviously, get them to run it, and obviously with this program, it's looking at is the length of the username more than 4 characters. If it is, then we've got an acceptable length. If it's not, then it's not long enough. Obviously, and notice I haven't used a loop with this one, so it's not going to ask them to do it again. It's just ending the program with this one. Obviously, I could build that into a loop as well if I wanted to. And then obviously thinking about the comparison. So this is just going back to what they've done before, where we're looking at the different comparison operators. So on line 4, what does the symbol mean? Thinking back again about the construct, so that's kind of one of the big things with the GCSE at the moment and going forward, is can they identify different constructs that are being used in different programs? So looking at whether they've got sequences, selection or iteration in a program, and obviously getting the students to identify which of those are in there, and I try and do that as much as possible. So in kind of at least once a session, I will try and get one in there where I'm getting them to think about the constructs that are being used so they don't forget about them. So in this case, they've got sequences. Okay, so we have got a sequence of instructions and we have got selection in there. Obviously, there is no iteration for this one. And then obviously thinking about kind of general use, and again thinking about what OCR is looking for. They're looking for students to be able to identify the purpose of programs through reading through and what it might actually be used for. So see, this is kind of creating a username initially to go through and that a user might want to go through. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Perfect. So not quite as bad as programming as you like to make out. So, and again, kind of the modify tasks we've got in here. So in the make tasks, so fairly similar. So this time I'm getting them to have a go at creating the password. And again, we're starting to introduce kind of length on there to make sure that it's longer than 10 characters. In this case, so they need to have a more secure password. And then the final bit is where we can then start to get that loop in there, so they can have a go at doing it. So it keeps asking until they've got a long enough password.
And then could you add in stuff like where it counts the number of letters, like say it's only 6 letters, now it's only 7 letters, it's only whatever.
Yeah, you could quite easily get them to add a little bit in there, so every time they enter it in, it just does a length check and prints how long the letter or how long the word is, or the password is. That would be quite a good and quite an easy little adaptation that they can have a go at doing. But yeah, I mean, any kinds of modifications and things like that it's just getting them to think about how can I change this code. And again, I see those changes and that's why I think Prim works really well alongside the programming specification, is because the OCR are looking for, can they predict what some code might do? Can they kind of answer questions on some code? Can they understand what's going on? Can they make small changes to code? And can they write their own code? And obviously that really ties in with what they have to do as they go through, and kind of getting them used to it and kind of making that link each time, I think is useful as well. And then I think this is the final part that I was looking at. So this is kind of getting substrings in Python. So this is just looking at initial just one character and getting students used to how you can find a character within a string. So I'll just give you a moment just to have a look through that and see if you've got any questions with that at all.
So this is like another version of concatenation. So it will take the birth year.
Yeah.
So 1970, and then it will start searching in the name, whatever you put in.
Yep.
It will search through it, and obviously Python starts counting at 0. So for Natalie, it would put 1970N. Yep. And then that would be my username.
Yeah. Yep. So see, getting just that first character in this case, and obviously, yeah, because like you said, we start at 0, so arrays are 0 based, and this is where later on I start to then make the comparison. So it's quite good to do this kind of thing, because you can then say, well, actually, we did this using strings earlier on. So strings are very similar to arrays, and we can make that comparison in there. And so again, we're just looking at what's going on. I would have some questions later on that would look at how you can get multiple characters. So in Python, you'd have a colon after the first number, and then you'd have your second number. So where you want it to finish, and it, as with most things in Python, it finishes one before the number that you put as the second one, and so they can then start to do substrings in there and get kind of a larger part of it that's not just a single letter being returned. And so within here, what I'm looking for is so
how can you change that so that it says, say, maybe birth year 1970 plus NA?
So what I would do is, if I wanted the first two characters, it would be 0 colon 2 inside the brackets.
I don't understand.
Oh, let's go. So what I would have is, so let's say I had a variable name. I'm just going to put, if I wanted the first two characters.
Was this out of the?
That was again. Put that in there.
So if I just wanted, what if I didn't want to count from M? Could I change that to 1?
So yes, so you can change, so it can be whatever, you can start at whatever number you want and end at whatever number you want. Obviously you can't go higher or lower than the starting and ending numbers. So I've got 0 and 5. So if I go up past 5, I'll get some errors in there. But this one, right, I have done it all right, should return the first 2 letters. So yeah, so I could change this, so it started at 2 instead, ended at 4, and obviously then that would give RT. Something else that you can do is if you just do 2 colon, what that means is it will go from 2 right to the end. So if I run it this time, it starts at R and then has the rest of my name in there as well. And so these are kind of extra bits that I would then do as future tasks. And you can see these on the lessons that I've put together on OneNote that you're more
so where can you find, see, I would buy a resource like this that would just give me everything that I needed to be able to, because I can't think of the things to extend, and I can't think of the questions. Yeah. And this is just like watching you do it. Obviously I'm coming up with the ideas, but in a lesson, my programming skills are just not that strong to be able to just come up with these things. And it would be so nice to have something that would help me to, I don't know.
So obviously in terms of kind of the lesson tasks, the bits that I've put together on OneNote, you're more than happy to take and use. And there's kind of 4 activities for each part that I'm looking at. So for every single lesson we've been going through since September, there's kind of 4 different activities that are all got their modify makes and all those all built in. So you're more than welcome to use that. And then this is just kind of, if the students are kind of having a little bit of difficulty to understand it, it's just literally just putting in a little bit of the copy of the code that they can then see you changing and see what happens. But a lot of the time, I would always encourage them to have a play around with it to save you having to do that anyway. It's a little bit of a cheat, but they'll benefit much more from it if they're the one that is going through it and making these little changes in there. So whilst in the investigate stage, I've got these questions. So change the number inside the brackets, get them to make sure that they keep practicing doing that, so that even if they want to try something completely different, if it breaks it, it breaks it. We have alongside this an error log that we'd get the students to fill in as well, so that they're kind of thinking about what's causing the programs to break, so that they can then fix them in the future as well. Does that make sense and answer your question at all?
Sorry, I muted myself. I was talking to you. Yes. Yeah, yes, it does.
But I mean, kind of some of the resources that you can do if you want to purchase extra ones. I wouldn't necessarily give them to the students as such, but they give me some ideas when I'm kind of coming up with programming. There's some resources on Zigzag. I don't know if it's something you've heard of before.
Yes.
But they've got
Which one?
So I have got various ones. Just see if I find them.
Stupid. You know the orange cup?
We have got so far. There's a Python kit for Key Stage 4, and an OCR computer science algorithms resource pack as well, that we've bought into and that I just use every so often and use those for ideas. Not, I wouldn't say they're particularly great, but I think kind of as a teacher looking through them, they can give you some good ideas on the types of things that you can give students, or to kind of have it as a backup of, right, if I need to make any changes or demonstrate something, you could just have one of those pages printed out and then you just go through those on the board, so that it's a little bit different to what they're doing in the lesson.
Okay.
So, and then kind of the modify and the make tasks here, obviously would then just build on from there, just looking at doing it so it's the last character that they can do there. And for this one, they could edit it as well, or think about combining it with previous ones, so that it works with everyone's last name. They could use the length function to find that last character, rather than just always having 6 as the last character or 5 as the last character. Obviously, if the name's not long enough, that would then cause errors, or if it's not 6 characters, then it wouldn't get the same letter being returned, or the right letter being returned. So some of the more advanced students will hopefully start to combine these tools that we've been looking at over the course of the lesson.
So what it says, blah, 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 make a new program that asks the user to choose. The program should say whether the username is valid or not. A valid username must begin with an exclamation mark. So if you go back a few slides, no, back again.
Back to this sort of thing.
No, somewhere you used an exclamation mark, but I didn't actually understand what it was doing.
The exclamation mark here is just past the operator.
So that's the not.
Yeah. But with this one, all I'm looking for is, does the username begin with an exclamation mark? And that's where hopefully they'd use a similar sort of technique as we've got on here. I don't know if this will work, but we'll give it a go. So in this section here, I see that this is finding the first character of the name variable. And so what we're just looking for is, does that equal exclamation mark? So it's just a simple comparison.
I still can't believe Danny's parents are getting divorced.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So, and so that's the kind of thing that I'd be looking for with that. So, but yeah, I think that's all of the parts. Yeah, all the parts to go through today. Obviously, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And if you want to hang around to talk about A level for a little bit longer, then I'm more than happy to do so with that one.
Yes,
I don't know if
please.
anyone else has got any questions or anything they want to talk about at all. So everyone else has been fairly quiet.
No, thank you very much, Martin.
Is that all right?
That's brilliant. Yeah, I'll stick around for A level content.
No worries. No problem. I'll just go through some of the bits and pieces. If anyone is interested as well, I'm going to put a reminder link out there as well. But on Wednesday, I'm doing a curriculum planning meeting for secondary schools that you're more than welcome to sign up for. But I'll put a link on the Facebook groups. It's probably the easiest way.
When you
signed up for that.
Yeah, no, I know you are.
When you say curriculum planning, because I meant to ask you when I saw that link first, is it curriculum planning sort of like year 7 through?
So the aim, hopefully, if we've got time to before summer holidays, which I'm hoping we will, based on last night, is that we do have a curriculum plan from year 7 all the way up, possibly to year 13, if there's enough people that want to then go that far as well. And so kind of have this kind of what my bit is, my idea really is kind of trying to get that Ofsted deep dive thing in mind, and can we be sure that what we've developed is kind of the best we can. I think at the moment there's about 50 people signed up, so if we've got all 50 people having some input into it, I think we can definitely be sure that we're covering all bases.
See, my concerns about this curriculum planning business, I've been looking at loads of people's, their curriculum plans in the Facebook groups, is that everyone seems to, their curriculum is so heavily computer science. There isn't, things like graphics or digital literacy, like using email or being able to do, instead of calling it I don't know, not health and safety, like e-safety, they're calling it cyber security. And actually children don't understand cyber security, what they understand. So is it going to be that it covers this breadth?
So
because
my aim is to meet all of the national curriculum. So the first meeting that I did, we looked at the national curriculum and obviously all of the elements, and I kind of went through what we've got so far and what I want to go forward, and I'm hoping that with everyone we can get some ideas to have a really, really strong curriculum that clearly covers all aspects, and hopefully some people have got some ideas for different areas, and they can then kind of contribute that to make a scheme of work that is really kind of really detailed and kind of doesn't have any issues at all, hopefully anyway, but we'll see how it goes. Okay. Right, so what I'll do is I'll stop the recording of this bit now because this is slightly different, so I'm just going to do that.